Rob Arlett to my left, who's a Delaware state chair for the Trump Victory Leadership Team. And we have Jason Nichols, who's a lecturer in African American Studies at the University of Maryland and a Democratic strategist. Thank you both for sacrificing your evening to be here with us. There's quite a lot to unpack, but very little time. I want to start with this. We know that there are only two other presidents to be impeached by the House. That's, of course, Bill Clinton and Andrew Johnson. Both were acquitted by the Senate. Starting with you, Rob, how do you think history will view this day?
It's actually in this very studio, I believe, back in the summer that I mentioned to you, if and when the Democrats actually impeach the president, that would guarantee the re-election for President Trump. I stand by that statement again today. I think this partisan attempt of a coup validates my point that I made back in the summer, and it's very unfortunate. I think that in the end, the Democrats are attempting to be the Grinch that is stealing Christmas from the American people, and yet President Trump is actually having a very Merry Christmas rally in Michigan tonight. So I think it's very telling how President Trump is focused on the people, and the Democrats are focused on just one thing. They don't like President Trump, and they don't like the American people and how they voted for him back in 2016.
Jason, how will history remember this day?
Well, I think it's interesting that, we talk about the work of the American people and he's going to a campaign rally. That's not exactly the work of the American people. But one of the things that I think they're going to remember this as a somber day. This is not anything that people take any pleasure in. Nobody wants to see the president and who is the leader of the free world be impeached for abusing his power. But one of the things that our framers set up was that when someone abuses their power, commits a high crime, a misdemeanor, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors, that we have checks and balances. And Congress, their role is oversight. And so they're supposed to oversee the president. So they're going to see this as Congress doing their duty to the nation. And they're going to see this as the day after the president sends a letter that was unprecedented in American history. Not Johnson, not Nixon, not Clinton did anything like that that we've ever seen. So I think it's a really sad day in our history.
Jason, I wonder, though, there's been a lot of criticisms that there were calls for the president's impeachment far beyond when the inquiry started, before the phone call came out. And we know, does that hurt the Democratic Party in this, that there was this effort, this call for impeachment before the evidence came out?
No, and the reason why is because, number one, Rep. Al Green and many others were saying that the president should have been impeached, particularly after the Mueller report showed 11 different cases of obstruction. But you see Democrats held with a lot of restraint. They said, no, we're not going to go forward with this. Nancy Pelosi said, no, we're not going to do this, because she took impeachment seriously. Now, I think history will record the amount of restraint that Democrats used before they actually went through with this. They tried everything to not impeach President Trump, but the day after Bob Mueller testifies, he gets on the phone and makes this phone call, and that was the last straw.
Rob, Republicans have really criticized this impeachment effort, saying that this is absolutely not bipartisan and that impeachment should be a bipartisan effort. What can you tell us a little bit about I guess, their sentiments toward the entire process?
Well, I think the only thing that actually I would say that there is a bipartisan effort right now in this country, and that is to get away from the Democrat Party. I think that is a fact, and I say that because there are two, if not more today, that have come out saying they are walking away from the Democrat Party, one of which, of course, is an elected congressman from New Jersey, and another one is an elected congressman from Michigan. They are walking away from the silliness and the craziness of the Democrats, really the socialist left wing of this party, and they are the ones that are controlling the narrative that Nancy Pelosi, she only restrained herself because she did not want them to take control, but ultimately she bowed down to the leftist socialists of her own party. And here we are today. So there is a bipartisan effort to get away from this impeachment process, to include the Democrat and also the independent. And I think there is not one Republican, both in the House, not one Republican in the Senate, that will be voting for this fake, if you would, impeachment. And it is truly a sad day, and I would agree with my counterpart, and I like Jason. He's confused on his politics a little bit, but I love him as an American, and I think we have to remember that this is a somber day as an American. But as a Republican, we are going to celebrate because they are digging their own grave, and the Americans will rise and let it be known very loud and very clear next election cycle in 2020. I guarantee that.
Jason, for all day today, we've heard Republicans say there was no quid pro quo. This has been a biased effort. What's your response to that when you look at not only the hearings that were held behind closed doors, but also the hearings that were made public and the number of people that testified that there was potentially a quid pro quo?
I mean, it's not potentially. There was a quid pro quo. As a matter of fact, Mick Mulvaney said it, who they won't allow to testify. And Gordon Sondland was clear about the fact that there was a quid pro quo. So that's not even a question. The only time the president said that there was no quid pro quo was after he knew about the whistleblower. So there's no question that there was a quid pro quo. What we need to do, hopefully, and I hope that, Rob, after this situation, that we can come together as Americans and say, look, this president was impeached for doing what he did. I understand that, you know, some of the arguments that some Republicans, moderate Republicans, have made. I said, we can have that discussion. Whether these are impeachable, we can have that discussion. I'm willing to discuss that. What I won't discuss is whether he committed a quid pro quo and whether he withheld that aid from people who need it, and people died over those 52 days that he withheld it. That's something that's not up for debate. What is up for debate is whether it rises to the level of impeachment. I think putting our national security at risk and abusing your power is impeachable.
Rob, is it?
Well, I think it's comical and since sad that all of a sudden the Democrats are worried about our international defense, if you would, or our own safety, yet they won't have a wall down at the southern border. So I think it's kind of silly and hypocritical of them to even make that comment. And actually, I agree with Jason that there absolutely was a quid pro quo, but they got the wrong person.
You just said there wasn't.
I think that there was.
Okay, great.
I agree with you.
I'm glad.
But the only issue that we have a difference is it was not President Trump, it was Vice President Joe Biden. And I'm from Delaware. And I have to tell you, that there is video evidence, Jason, you cannot deny, I know you've seen this video, there is video evidence of Joe Biden demanding for them to fire an investigator within 6 hours, or else they were not going to get, how much money was it, Jason?
So listen, since he brought that up, and he passed it over to me. Since he brought it up to me.
I think we should investigate all to include Vice President Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
Would you not agree with that?
No, I think that you bring up a good point.
Thank you.
Now, again, Joe Biden is completely a distraction from the issue at hand. We know that this impeachment is about President Trump. It's not about who the vice president was in the past. But since he brought that up, one of the things that we do know is that Joe Biden, when he went to fire that corrupt prosecutor, and he said, look, you need to fire him, you need to act, he was working against corruption. And it was an international effort. It wasn't just him, it was other members of NATO, other members of the European community were all saying, this guy's got to go because he's corrupt. Now, of course, the Republicans are trying to spin this, which is incredible that, you know, when you look back at the impeachment process for Nixon, Americans came together. They said this was wrong what this president did. Mm-hmm. Americans didn't do that for Clinton because that was a different situation. But with Nixon, we certainly know that. And what this president is accused to have done or said to have done is far worse than anything Nixon was ever accused of. And Nixon was patriotic enough to step down for the good of the nation. This president sends a 6-page tweet, you know, angry tweet, basically trying to inflame emotions.
I want to touch on one of your points, Jason, which is this is not a unified effort to impeach the president. Mm-hmm. And in fact, it's not only divisive within Congress, but even Americans appear to be divided on it. I think the latest average of all the polls show that impeachment is now underwater. It's actually now less than 50% of those polled believe that the president should be impeached and removed. How do we explain those figures, Rob?
I think because Americans are paying attention, because President Trump is fighting back because he's not done anything wrong, Jason. That's the difference. And previous guys perhaps did not because, well, Bill Clinton, President Clinton, he actually hid and was quiet when he was going through getting impeached. So President Trump is just the opposite because he's not done anything wrong. And I think the American people are paying attention. And I will continue to say it on your studio. It's an honor for me to say it, but this is another demise by the Democrats. They themselves are not even unified in this impeachment process. And I think that's a very telling statement because they are walking away from the Democrat Party, and they do not have 100%
Jason, you have a 20-second response because we got to go to other news.
All right, one guy who was facing a primary, who was on his way out, knows he was going to get primaried, wants to stay alive, and says, okay, I'm going to switch parties. That guy doesn't even count. We don't want him. You can have him.
Of course
now,
he doesn't.
And again, we're already, we already are in the majority. There was a referendum in 2018, basically, that said we don't agree with President Trump. As far as those numbers,
see, there you go.
Compare those numbers to the Clinton numbers, where the support for impeachment was in the low 30s. And then you've got it near 50%. And many polls, even including Fox News, conservative network, says that it's 50% not only for impeachment, but for removal. That is unprecedented in modern history.
We are going to unpack this
even
more a little bit later in the show.
That's what the Democrats have done.
Gentlemen, thank you so much. We have to pivot to some other news, but we will have you both back for more analysis as this vote comes down, maybe in the next hour or so.